They laughed as the weapons hit the floor. Not nervous laughter. Not uncertain chuckles. Real laughter, the kind that echoes in great halls built by empires that have never lost a war. Blades clattered. Rifles deactivated. Railcores dimmed. One by one, humanity's armaments were placed in neat, ceremonial lines at the center of the Galactic Assembly, like offerings to amuse gods. And the galaxy decided, in that moment, that humans were harmless. You need to understand what that moment meant. For 300 cycles, the Galactic Assembly had ruled through force disguised as order. Species rose by conquest, fell by extinction, and survived by learning one immutable law of the stars. Power was proven only through violence. Every chair in that circular chamber had been earned through blood. Every voice that carried weight had first commanded fleets. Except the human one. Humanity had arrived late to the galactic stage. No ancient precursor myths. No reality-bending technologies. No genetically engineered castes bred for war. Just a species that had clawed its way off a single gravity well, and somehow survived long enough to say hello. They were expected to posture, to threaten, to show teeth. Instead, they disarmed. The human ambassador, Elena Moreau, did not bow. She did not kneel. She simply raised her hands and spoke words that the translators hesitated to render, as if unsure whether honesty itself violated protocol. "We come unarmed," she said. "Not because we are weak, but because we choose trust." That was when the laughter truly began. The Threxian War Master slammed his clawed gauntlet against the arm of his throne, producing a sound like metal screaming in pain. His species had conquered 17 systems before inventing art. To him, disarmament was not bravery. It was prey behavior. "Trust," he repeated, savoring the words like spoiled meat, "is what the defeated beg for." Across the chamber, the crystalline matriarchs refracted light in sharp, mocking patterns. The Averan tacticians exchanged probability charts that already predicted humanity's absorption or extinction within 5 cycles. Even the neutral observers leaned forward, eager to witness how long this naive species would last without teeth. And yet, Elena Moreau smiled. Not the smile of someone unaware of danger. The smile of someone who had already accounted for it. What no one in that chamber understood, what they could not understand, was that humans did not view weapons the way the galaxy did. To the Assembly, weapons were extensions of authority, symbols of dominance, tools of control. To humans, weapons were a last resort, because humanity's greatest strength had never been centralized power. It had been distribution. Long before first contact, humans learned a brutal lesson on their own world. No single army, no single government, no single leader could protect everyone. Empires fell. Regimes collapsed. Systems failed. And every time, survival did not come from the top down. It came from civilians. Engineers rerouting power grids under bombardment. Doctors improvising surgeries without supplies. Farmers feeding cities while supply chains burned. Programmers patching defenses in real time while missiles fell. Ordinary people doing extraordinary things because no one else would. So when humanity reached the stars, they did not build a single great fleet and call it safety. They built redundancy. But the galaxy never bothered to ask how. The Assembly concluded its session with formal disdain. Humanity was granted observer status, denied military parity, and quietly reclassified from potential peer to managed species. Trade lanes were opened, treaties drafted, and surveillance increased. The laughter faded into policy. Within a single cycle, the tests began. Human trade convoys started disappearing at the edges of neutral space. Not openly attacked, just intercepted, delayed, inspected. Mining colonies reported navigation failures near assembly borders. Communication relays experienced unexplained outages. Always plausible. Always deniable. The galaxy wanted to see how humans would react. They reacted by doing nothing. No fleets mobilized. No threats issued. No ultimatums broadcast. Human representatives filed complaints through proper channels, requested investigations, and continued disarming in joint exercises to build confidence. The laughter returned, quieter now, more dangerous. The Threxian War Master authorized a limited action. A demonstration. One colony, lightly populated, strategically irrelevant. A message written in orbital fire. The attack was swift, precise, professional. Human defenses did not respond. Assembly observers watched the feeds with interest as kinetic strikes reduced surface structures to glowing scars. Casualty estimates rose. Communications went dark. And still, nothing. No retaliation. No declaration of war. The War Master leaned back in his throne, satisfied. "They have no claws," he said. "Only words." What he did not see, what none of them saw, was what happened 10 seconds after the colony's emergency signal cut out. Across human space, devices activated that had no military designation. Power grids rerouted themselves, isolating compromised sectors. Civilian satellites shifted orbits, forming dense sensor webs without waiting for authorization. Private cargo vessels altered flight paths, creating spontaneous supply corridors. Personal AI assistants pushed encrypted updates to billions of endpoints simultaneously. No general gave the order. No admiral issued commands. Because there was no command structure to target. The galaxy had spent millennia perfecting decapitation strikes. Kill the leader. Destroy the fleet. Shatter the capital. Victory followed. Humanity had removed every head worth cutting. The first anomaly registered in assembly space 12 hours later. A Threxian patrol ship reported false sensor ghosts, thousands of them, appearing and vanishing across multiple spectra. The crew dismissed it as a software glitch until their navigation locks failed simultaneously. They never saw the microsingularity net deploy. No human signature was recorded. 2 days later, an Averin logistics hub experienced a cascading failure when its own automated systems began rejecting assembly authentication keys. The code was elegant, non-hostile, legally compliant, and completely irreversible without shutting down the station for weeks. Then came the whispers. Merchant guilds complained that human trade vessels were impossible to embargo. They rerouted instantly, sourced locally, adapted faster than any centralized economy should have been able to. Independent human habitats, supposedly vulnerable, proved maddeningly resilient. Destroy one node, and 3 more compensated. Still, the assembly did not panic. Yet, because none of this looked like war. There were no fleets, no bombardments, no grand speeches, just friction. Everywhere human interests intersected with assembly control, systems became unreliable. Supply lines stretched. Maintenance costs rose. Predictive models lost accuracy. The galaxy had expected retaliation. What it got was something far worse. It got uncertainty. The Threxian War Master convened an emergency council, furious now. "They are sabotaging us," he snarled. "Covertly. Cowardly." The crystalline matriarchs disagreed. No hostile intent signatures detected. They refracted. "Only adaptive behaviors." "And the colony?" the War Master demanded. "Where is their outrage?" That question echoed farther than he intended. Because the truth was this: humanity had grieved. Deeply. Quietly. The loss had not been broadcast as a rallying cry. It had been absorbed, processed, and integrated. Every human civilian network had received the data, not as propaganda, as context. This is what betrayal looks like. And somewhere, deep within systems never declared as weapons, thresholds were being approached. The Assembly believed humanity was still disarmed. They had no idea how close they were to learning what humans did instead of revenge. And that was the moment, though no one recognized it yet, when the last protocol began to wake. The Assembly told itself a comforting story. It said that humans were improvising, that the disruptions were accidental consequences of a young species learning the inefficiencies of interstellar politics, that nothing truly dangerous could come from a people who had stood in the greatest hall of power and voluntarily laid down their guns. The galaxy had always equated danger with spectacle, with fleets blotting out stars, with superweapons that announced themselves through terror. Humans offered none of that. So the Assembly relaxed, even as its margins eroded. But far from the Assembly chambers, far beyond any capital world worth threatening, the human response continued to unfold, quietly, methodically, and with unnerving patience. Every human civilian had grown up with drills. Not military drills. Continuity drills. What happens when power fails? What happens when communication disappears? What happens when authority cannot reach you? These were not emergency scenarios reserved for soldiers. They were everyday contingencies baked into culture, infrastructure, and education. Humanity did not assume safety. It planned for interruption. The loss of the colony was classified across human networks not as an attack, but as a trigger event. A single line of text propagated through encrypted civilian channels, invisible to any Assembly monitor that knew what to look for but not what to listen for. Threshold 1 acknowledged. That was all. No call to arms. No declaration. Just acknowledgement. The Assembly did not notice when the first predictive models began failing outright. Their algorithms relied on historical data, species reacting to aggression in predictable ways. Retaliation, submission, escalation. Humans offered none of the above. Instead, trade dependencies quietly inverted. A mining consortium on the edge of Assembly space discovered that every replacement component for their extractors now required human-manufactured subelements. No embargo had been declared. No contract broken. The supply chains had simply reoptimized. The Averan tacticians flagged the anomaly. They could not understand how a species with no standing military presence in Assembly territory could exert such pressure without firing a single shot. "Because you're still looking for generals," Elena Moreau said, when summoned before a subcommittee weeks later. "And we don't fight that way." Her words were recorded, archived, and dismissed as rhetoric. The War Master wanted a second demonstration. Larger this time. Louder. But something held him back. Not fear, but irritation. Every aggressive probe into human space had produced diminishing returns. Their systems adapted faster than his fleets could redeploy. His admirals complained of targets that refused to remain targets, of objectives that dissolved the moment they were defined. The galaxy had never faced a species that treated war like an environmental condition rather than a contest. Still, the Assembly authorized another strike. Not overt. A proxy. Pirates, officially unaffiliated, equipped with Assembly-grade hardware. Plausible deniability layered atop deniability. They hit a transport nexus, civilian, crowded, valuable. This time, the human response was visible. But not in the way the galaxy expected. There was no counterattack. No pursuit. Instead, every human world went dark. Not silent. Dark. Navigation beacons powered down. Public comm shifted to type beam, point-to-point transmissions. Human data traffic vanished from Assembly-accessible networks in under 3 minutes. The Assembly panicked. Trade markets stuttered. Forecasts collapsed. Human goods, critical, ubiquitous, were suddenly unavailable. Not seized. Not destroyed. Simply unreachable. And then, slowly, messages began arriving. Not from governments. From people. A dockworker on a fringe station sent a perfectly formatted logistics advisory explaining why Assembly shipping lanes were about to experience cascading delays. A schoolteacher transmitted a cultural bulletin clarifying why certain Assembly symbols were now considered untrusted. A private citizen uploaded a patch that rendered Assembly authentication keys incompatible with newly standardized civilian systems. None of it was hostile. All of it was devastating. The Assembly tried to respond. It issued sanctions that no one could enforce. It dispatched fleets to reassert presence, only to find their supply contracts invalidated by clauses they had never realized humans controlled. Their ships remained powerful. Their crews remained disciplined. They simply could not stay operational. "What are they doing?" the War Master demanded, slamming his throne again. "This is not war." "No," Elena Moreau replied calmly, present via hologram. "It's consent withdrawal." That phrase spread through the Assembly like a contagion. Consent withdrawal? Humans had never sought dominance. They had asked to participate, to integrate, to trust. And when that trust had been broken, they did not lash out. They stepped back. And in doing so, they revealed something terrifying. The galaxy was dependent on humans in ways it had never audited. Human engineers had optimized transit algorithms. Human mediators had streamlined trade law. Human civilian AIs had quietly become standard across mixed species infrastructure because they were efficient, adaptive, and open source. No one had questioned why humans never charged licensing fees. Now they understood. You cannot embargo what was never owned. You cannot seize what was freely given. And you cannot threaten a people who have already planned for losing everything you can take. Across human space, the phrase threshold 2 acknowledged appeared. This time, it was followed by a question pushed to every civilian terminal, public and private alike. Do you consent to escalation if non-hostile measures fail? There was no vote count broadcast. No results announced. Because the question was not about permission. It was about readiness. The Assembly sensed something moving beneath the surface now. Something vast and distributed. Their intelligence agencies scrambled, but they could not infiltrate what had no center. Every human node was autonomous, yet synchronized by shared values rather than commands. The War Master ordered a full mobilization. That was the moment the galaxy made its final mistake. Because mobilization required visibility. And visibility was what the last protocol had been waiting for. Human civilian sensors, weather arrays, traffic monitors, research telescopes, personal exploration drones, began sharing data. Not upward. Sideways. Laterally. A mesh of awareness formed across thousands of light years, built not for targeting but for understanding. Assembly fleet movements became obvious, predictable, mapped, and then irrelevant. The first assembly dreadnought to suffer the effects reported no attack, no damage. Its crew simply woke to find that every non-essential system had locked itself into maintenance mode. Life support functioned. Engines idled. Weapon safeties engaged. The ship was not destroyed. It was politely asked to stop. Similar reports followed. Across sectors. Across fleets. The galaxy screamed sabotage. Humans shrugged. Your systems complied with their own safety protocols, Elena said, once more before the council. We helped write them. The laughter was gone now. In its place was something colder. Fear. Because the assembly was realizing, too late, that humanity's disarmament had not been an act of surrender. It had been a declaration of philosophy. Weapons centralize power. Resilience decentralizes it. And humans had chosen resilience. Somewhere, deep in a layer of infrastructure no assembly scanner had ever flagged as military, a final condition flickered from amber to green. Threshold 3 prepared. The last protocol was not a weapon. It was a promise. And the galaxy was about to learn what humans do when promises are broken. Before we continue, ask yourself this and leave your answer in the comments. If your world learned tomorrow that humanity had been holding back, not out of weakness, but restraint, would you feel safer or more afraid? Fear changes the way empires breathe. The Galactic Assembly had always inhaled deeply, secure, expansive, confident that the stars themselves bent around its authority. Now its breath came shallow, sharp, each decision rushed by the awareness that something fundamental had slipped beyond control. Threshold 3 prepared. The phrase appeared nowhere official. No assembly sensor detected it. No intelligence service intercepted it. Yet across human space, among billions of civilians who had never met and never needed to, the understanding was immediate. This was the line. Up to this point, everything humanity had done could be framed, if one tried hard enough, as misunderstanding, as unintended consequences, as economic friction. The galaxy could still tell itself the lie that humans were clever traders, not existential threats. Threshold 3 meant the lie was no longer necessary. It meant that if betrayal continued, humans would stop compensating for the galaxy's assumptions. The assembly attempted negotiation. Not openly. Pride still mattered. Instead, envoys were sent quietly to human-adjacent systems, carrying revised treaties and carefully worded apologies that never used the word attack. They promised investigations, oversight, reparations. The envoys never reached their destinations. Not because they were intercepted, because the destinations no longer existed as fixed points. Human space had become fluid. Habitats shifted orbits. Stations decoupled from predictable lanes. Even planets, entire settled worlds, adjusted infrastructure and communication in ways that rendered external navigation data obsolete. Nothing vanished. Nothing hid. It simply refused to be pinned down. This was not camouflage. It was autonomy at scale. The Assembly's greatest strength had always been its ability to map, classify, and control. Every species it governed fit somewhere in a hierarchy. Every system had a role. Every role had limits. Humans had just removed themselves from the chart. The War Master finally did what the galaxy had expected from the beginning. He declared war. The declaration echoed through Assembly space, carried on ancient frequencies reserved for extinction-level conflicts. Fleets mobilized openly now. No more proxies. No more deniability. If humans wished to pretend at pacifism, the galaxy would remind them what power looked like. The declaration reached human systems 6 minutes later. It was acknowledged. Only that. No counter-declaration followed. No rallying speech. No broadcast of defiance. Humanity did not mirror the galaxy's theatrics. Instead, something subtle changed. Human civilian networks, which had been loosely synchronized, began operating with perfect coherence. Not uniformity, coherence. Differences remained. Cultures, dialects, local priorities. But beneath it all ran a shared logic, as if the species itself had taken a single, steady breath. Threshold 3 acknowledged. The last protocol activated. To the galaxy, activation looked like nothing. No energy spike. No fleet movement. No weapons fire. The Assembly waited for catastrophe and received silence. Then reports began trickling in. A frontier world loyal to the Assembly reported civil unrest. Not rebellion, but confusion. Automated systems that had governed utilities for decades were issuing requests instead of commands. Citizens were being asked whether they consented to continued Assembly oversight of resources, security, and data. The requests were written in flawless local dialects, respectful, transparent, and impossible to dismiss as coercion. Similar requests appeared elsewhere. On industrial worlds. On trade hubs. On military outposts. The galaxy had never asked its populations for consent before. Humans had. What the Assembly did not understand was that the last protocol did not target governments. It targeted assumptions. For millennia, the galaxy had operated on the premise that authority flowed downward. That order required enforcement. That without the threat of violence, systems would collapse. Humans had tested that premise on themselves, and found it false. The last protocol did not shut anything down. It offered alternatives. Energy grids were presented with more efficient routing options that bypassed Assembly taxation nodes. Communication networks were given open protocols that allowed peer-to-peer resilience instead of centralized monitoring. Defense systems were shown simulations where standing down reduced long-term risk rather than increasing it. Every system retained choice. That was the most dangerous part. Some refused. Loyalist worlds doubled down, rejecting human frameworks and reaffirming Assembly control. Their systems remained operational. For now. Others, quietly, cautiously, opted in. The effects were immediate. Worlds that adopted human protocols experienced fewer outages. Better disaster response. Increased trade flexibility. Their citizens noticed. Comparisons spread. Questions followed. The Assembly tried to suppress the spread of information. It couldn't, because humans did not broadcast propaganda. They published documentation. Open, verifiable, adaptable. You cannot censor a manual that explains how to survive without you. The War Master ordered strikes on suspected human control nodes. there were none. Human influence was not a network you could sever. It was a method you could adopt or ignore. Destroying infrastructure only demonstrated the fragility of assembly dependence. The first major defection came from an unlikely source. A border garrison world, long considered loyal, announced its decision to suspend assembly military presence. Not as rebellion, as reclassification. The announcement cited improved local security metrics under civilian-managed defense frameworks inspired by human continuity models. Inspired, not controlled. The assembly sent a fleet. The fleet arrived and found nothing to fight. No shields raised. No weapons charged. The garrison welcomed them, offered supplies, and politely requested that heavy armaments remain powered down within civilian zones. The fleet commander hesitated. He had orders. He also had data. Human-style civilian sensors tracked everything. Every movement. Every escalation scenario played out in advance, not as threat but as forecast. The commander saw, with chilling clarity, that firing first would not lead to victory. It would lead to irrelevance. He withdrew. The galaxy watched, stunned. The War Master raged. "This is subversion!" he roared. "They are dismantling us from within." Elena Moreau appeared one final time before the full assembly. "We offered trust," she said. "You laughed. We offered restraint. You tested it. Now we offer choice. Or else." The War Master spat. Elena shook her head. "There is nowhere else. That's the point." She gestured, and the chamber filled with projections, not of fleets or weapons, but of people. Species from across the assembly, living ordinary lives, benefiting from systems that did not require fear to function. "You can keep your empire," Elena said softly, "but you cannot keep it unquestioned." The assembly realized then what the last protocol truly was. Not a doomsday device. A mirror. It showed the galaxy what governance looked like without coercion, and in doing so, made coercion impossible to justify. Where fleets sat idle, their purpose eroded. Sanctions lost meaning when alternatives existed. Authority weakened not through destruction, but through comparison. The laughter that had once filled the assembly halls felt like a memory from another age. Threshold 4 approached. And Threshold 4 was the one humans hoped would never be reached. Because Threshold 4 was not about survival. It was about succession. The question now facing the galaxy was no longer whether humans were dangerous. It was whether the galaxy could survive becoming something better. Empires do not fall the way histories claim. There is rarely a final battle, no single moment where banners burn and tyrants kneel. More often, empires end quietly, when enough people stop believing they are inevitable. Threshold 4 was never meant to activate. Among humans, it had always been discussed in the same tone reserved for asteroid impacts and stellar collapse events. A contingency not for enemies, but for responsibility. Because if the galaxy could not coexist with what humanity offered, then humanity would have to decide how much of itself it was willing to protect. Threshold 4 did not mean escalation. It meant separation. The Galactic Assembly convened in chaos. Worlds were no longer waiting for permission. Systems once considered peripheral now functioned independently, resilient and calm in ways assembly-controlled sectors were not. Trade flowed around old authorities instead of through them. Information moved laterally, immune to censorship. And everywhere, the same question surfaced. Why do we still need them? The War Master stood alone now. His fleets were intact, his weapons unmatched in raw destructive potential, but no one asked for them anymore. Military might without legitimacy had become theater. Impressive, useless, desperate, the assembly attempted its final leverage. They threatened annihilation. Not a specific world. Not a species. A warning broadcast across the stars. If humanity did not dismantle its civilian-controlled systems and submit to centralized oversight, the assembly would initiate scorched space protocols. Entire regions would burn. The galaxy waited. Humanity responded, not with defiance, not with fear, but with honesty. Elena Moreau addressed not the assembly, but everyone else. "We will not fight you," she said, "and we will not rule you. We will do something far more dangerous." She paused. "We will leave." Confusion rippled across every channel. Leave where? Humans did not possess territory vast enough to escape an empire that spanned thousands of systems. Elena clarified. "We will withdraw our frameworks, our infrastructure support, our continuity protocols. We will stop compensating for your dependence." That was threshold 4. Across human space, systems began decoupling, not violently, not abruptly, but completely. Human-designed optimizations reverted to neutral states. Open-source tools remained open, but active assistance ceased. Human advisors stepped back. Human networks closed their doors, not in secrecy, but in sovereignty. The galaxy felt it immediately, not as collapse, as exposure. Assembly worlds that had relied on human redundancies discovered how brittle their systems truly were. Maintenance backlogs surged. Response times lengthened. Forecasting errors multiplied. Nothing catastrophic, just enough friction to make daily life harder. And people noticed. They had tasted something better. The War Master ordered the first annihilation strike. His fleet commanders refused. Not out of rebellion. Out of calculation. They had seen the simulations. Annihilation would not restore control. It would accelerate irrelevance. Every act of terror only validated the human model. Every burned world became another argument against empire. The War Master was relieved of command. Not by force, by procedure. The assembly voted, fractured, fearful, but decisive. Emergency powers were revoked. Succession protocols activated. For the first time in its history, the assembly chose survival over dominance. They reached out to humanity, not as subjects, as peers. The message was simple. Teach us. Humanity debated the response, not in secret councils or closed chambers, but openly. Civilians discussed it. Scientists argued. Farmers weighed in. Artists asked what kind of galaxy they wanted their children to inherit. There was no unanimous answer. That, too, was the point. Elena delivered humanity's decision weeks later. "We will not lead you," she said, "and we will not rebuild your empire in our image. But we will share what we know, freely, openly, without enforcement." The assembly accepted, because it had no other choice. What followed was not a golden age. It was something harder. A learning age. Worlds experimented with consent-based governance. Some failed. Some reverted. Others thrived in unexpected ways. Human frameworks were adapted, localized, sometimes misunderstood, but never imposed. The galaxy changed slowly, unevenly, painfully. But it changed. The assembly still existed, but as a forum, not a fist. Fleets were downsized, repurposed for disaster response and exploration. Power no longer flowed cleanly downward. It circulated. And humanity? Humanity remained what it had always been. A species that understood something the galaxy had taken millennia to learn. That the most terrifying power is not the ability to destroy. It is the ability to walk away and be missed. Years later, historians would debate the moment the galaxy truly shifted. Some would point to the first disarmament, others to the colony's destruction, others still to the refusal of fleet commanders to fire. But among humans, the answer was simpler. The galaxy laughed when we laid down our weapons. And in doing so, it taught us exactly what it feared. Not our guns. Our choice. Before the story ends, I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly in the comments. If humanity really did possess power like this, would you want us to use it to lead the galaxy? Or to make sure no one ever has to rule it again?